I didn't set out to find giants. That's the part that still unsettles me the most. This began as a routine investigation into historical architecture, the kind most researchers dismiss after a few notes and measurements. Doorways that felt oddly tall, staircases that demanded exaggerated steps, furniture that seemed just slightly wrong, oversized, but not exaggerated enough to be theatrical. At first, the explanations were easy. Symbolic grandeur, Victorian excess, architectural intimidation. That's what the book said. So I moved on, until I found the photographs. Not illustrations, not paintings, not folklore passed down through exaggeration. Photographs. Original images from the mid to late 1800s, sepia-toned, faded, undeniably real. They showed human beings standing beside ordinary men and women, except these individuals were impossibly large, 8 feet, 9 feet, some appearing even taller. What stopped me cold wasn't just their height. It was the normalcy. They weren't posed like curiosities. They weren't labeled as performers. They weren't displayed as anomalies. They stood calmly in formal clothing, often beside family members of average size, sometimes in front of official buildings. Their posture was relaxed, their expressions unremarkable, as if their size required no explanation at all. I checked the images obsessively: grain consistency, shadow direction, lighting fall-off, every marker photographers use to detect manipulation, but these photos predated the technology required to fake them convincingly. No composites, no double exposure tricks. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Cabinet cards from the 1870s. Carte de visite photographs from the 1860s. Tintypes showing men, and occasionally women, towering over crowds, sometimes holding tools, sometimes dressed in uniforms. These weren't circus giants. There were no posters, no touring records, no promotional material. Just people. Even more unsettling, these images weren't rare. They appeared again and again, clustering tightly between 1850 and 1900, then vanishing entirely. I traced the archives, British Museum references that acknowledged their existence, then quietly dismissed them as medical anomalies without further inquiry. French collections filed them under miscellaneous. Russian imperial documents casually mention individuals of unusual stature serving in ceremonial or supervisory roles. Always the same pattern. Acknowledge. Label. Move on. No curiosity. No investigation. No follow-up. And that's when the question stopped being, did giants exist? And became something far more dangerous. Why did so many exist at the same time, and why did they suddenly disappear from the record? Because history doesn't usually forget things by accident. And that's when I noticed where they were standing. In front of buildings. Not ordinary homes, but massive stone structures, government halls, administrative buildings, courthouses, structures with doorways so tall they feel absurd for modern humans, yet perfectly proportioned when a 9-foot figure stands beneath them. Buildings, we are told, were designed for aesthetic grandeur. But grandeur doesn't explain oversized corridors hidden deep inside working spaces. It doesn't explain staircases built for strides no average person can comfortably take. It doesn't explain furniture scaled for bodies that don't officially exist. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. What if these buildings weren't made to impress us, but to function for someone else? Before we dive deeper, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone fascinated by lost history. Comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our journey reaches. When I first measured these buildings, I felt like I was seeing the impossible in plain sight. Doors 12, 14 feet high, hallways stretching longer than any residence could require, staircases rising in enormous increments, almost forcing a long-legged stride. Furniture, from chairs to desks, that seemed custom-built for people of extraordinary height. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe these were ceremonial buildings. Maybe just decorative exaggeration. But the scale repeated itself in hundreds of locations across Europe, Asia, and North America. Administrative halls in St. Petersburg, municipal buildings in Buenos Aires, government offices in Delhi, all built between 1700 and 1900, all designed with the same oversized proportions. And then it clicked. This wasn't random, it wasn't aesthetic whimsy. These buildings were functional, they were built for the people who occupied them. The giants in the photographs weren't anomalies, they were the intended users. The pattern became even more compelling when I cross-referenced these structures with historical photographs. Every time a giant is pictured formally, the building behind them mirrors their scale perfectly. Oversized doors, massive staircases, furniture that fits them exactly. This isn't coincidence, it's deliberate. Now layer in Tartaria. The maps from the 1700s show a vast, organized civilization spanning northern Asia. Encyclopedias and atlases casually place it on the map. Then suddenly it disappears, erased, not conquered, not renamed, just gone. Yet the architecture remains. Massive halls, doorways sized for giants, hallways echoing with the memory of larger-than-human occupants. Who built these structures? Who were they for? And why were these people, these giants, systematically erased from our history books? Even the photographs themselves are curated. Thousands of images of ordinary life from the 1800s, but the giants only appear in formal, official contexts, never casually in domestic scenes, never as entertainers, always in positions of authority, overseeing construction, administration, or governance. The evidence forms a single, unnerving conclusion. These were functional members of society, not freaks, not anomalies, and the buildings were scaled to their needs, not ours. Next, we'll explore the skeletal evidence and newspaper reports, the physical proof that these giants walked among us and that their existence was systematically erased. The photographs told a story, but the ground beneath us spoke even louder. Across America, Europe, and Asia, 19th-century newspapers reported discoveries that would shock us today: giant human skeletons, not anomalies found in isolation, but systematic discoveries, whole burial sites, with remains measuring 7 to 12 feet tall. The New York Times in 1885 reported a 7-foot skeleton in Michigan. The San Diego Union in 1895 described bones of extraordinary size unearthed during railroad construction. The Middletown Signal in 1899 documented giants buried in Ohio, alongside artifacts suggesting advanced metalwork and construction knowledge. These weren't sensationalized tabloid stories. These were mainstream accounts, factual reports of something our history books now pretend never happened. And then mysteriously, it all stops after 1920. Skeletons vanish, photographs disappear, newspaper reports dry up. The Smithsonian, which had previously studied some of these remains, now claims they do not exist. Records lost, misplaced, or quietly removed. Hundreds of specimens erased from collective memory. The pattern aligns perfectly with the Tartarian timeline. Photographs of giants cluster between 1850 and 1900, exactly when Tartaria vanishes from maps. Skeletal discoveries peak in the same decades, and then everything disappears. Coincidence? Almost impossible. The skeletal evidence confirms what the architecture and photographs hinted at. These giants were real, living members of society, not freaks or myths. Their presence was documented, yet systematically erased from history. These skeletons weren't buried haphazardly. Many were interred with care, sometimes alongside tools, ceremonial items, or artifacts indicative of advanced knowledge. They were respected, recognized, functional members of a civilization that the world later pretended never existed. Next, we'll dive into the global architectural evidence. staircases, doors, furniture, and how their sizes reveal the unmistakable footprint of these lost giants. The photographs and skeletons were only part of the puzzle. The real evidence stood in stone, wood, and iron, spread across the globe. Courthouses in St. Petersburg, municipal buildings in Buenos Aires, colonial offices in Delhi, all built during the 1700s and 1800s, share an uncanny similarity. Doorways towering over 12 feet, staircases with risers impossible for average humans, furniture scaled far beyond what a normal person could use comfortably. These weren't ceremonial spaces or decorative choices. They were functional buildings, working offices, corridors, administrative centers, designed to be used daily. Yet the scale was not human. The proportions made sense only if the occupants themselves were giants. In Europe, demolition sites reveal massive tools and wrenches, 4 to 6 feet long, worn as if used by hands larger than any human today. Auction catalogs list enormous chairs, desks, and beds, often labeled as oversized Victorian furniture, dismissing the clear evidence. Colonial architecture in India shows government offices scaled for extraordinary height, while adjacent residential quarters remain standard-sized. In the United States, old courthouses and administrative complexes share the same pattern, functional buildings designed for people far taller than we are accustomed to. Every continent shows traces of this anomaly. The scale, the precision, the repeated design, impossible to ignore. These structures aren't random. They're evidence of a society built for giants, a civilization whose inhabitants we have systematically erased from memory. When you walk through these old halls today, you see grandeur, but understanding the scale reveals something far more profound. History, as we know it, has forgotten the giants who built it. Maps from the 1700s and early 1800s tell a story most historians ignore. There, in the vast stretches of northern Asia, lay Tartaria, a territory so immense it spanned thousands of miles. Encyclopedias, atlases, and official records marked it as plainly as France or Spain. It existed, documented, and undeniable. Yet by the mid-1800s, Tartaria vanishes completely, not conquered, not renamed, simply erased. The territory disappears from maps, the encyclopedias omit it, and history books act as if it had never existed. But the architecture remains. Massive stone buildings, colossal doorways, oversized furniture, structures built with precision and scale that cannot be explained by human averages. What's most compelling is the timing. The last photographs of giants and the disappearance of Tartaria occur in the same decades. Skeletal discoveries stop, giant artifacts vanish, and maps are rewritten. It's as if the world collectively agreed to forget the evidence. Across continents, similar structures exist. Russia, massive administrative halls with doors and staircases, far beyond normal human scale. Central Asia, stone structures with exacting precision, seemingly impossible for the era's technology. South America, municipal buildings with halls sized for extraordinary height. Even tools, chairs, and everyday objects match the scale. Giant wrenches, oversized desks, and enormous beds were functional, not ceremonial. Every piece of evidence points to a society with a class of physically extraordinary humans, a civilization we've been taught never existed. The question becomes unavoidable. Who were they, and why has history erased them so completely? The photographs, the buildings, the tools, all remain silent witnesses to a world we've been told never existed. The giants weren't anomalies. They were a functional part of a forgotten civilization, and Tartaria was their home. The late 1800s were a strange era for history. Newspapers across the United States regularly reported giant skeletons being unearthed, yet today these discoveries seem almost forgotten. 1885, Michigan. The New York Times reported a 7-foot skeleton discovered during mound excavation. 1895, California. San Diego Union chronicled bones of extraordinary size found along a railroad construction site. 1899, Ohio. The Middletown Signal described skeletal remains measuring up to 12 feet in length, buried in organized grave, often with artifacts suggesting advanced craftsmanship. These weren't tabloid stories. They were considered newsworthy by mainstream papers, and yet today, references vanish. Many skeletons were sent to institutions like the Smithsonian, only to be declared missing or lost in routine transfers. This pattern aligns disturbingly with Tartaria. The giants disappear just as Tartaria vanishes from maps. Photographs stop appearing. Skeleton reports end abruptly. Artifacts are misclassified or stored away. Across continents, the same story repeats. From Europe to America, from Russia to Asia, skeletons of extraordinary size appear and then fade from records, leaving only whispers and rumors. What does this tell us? The evidence wasn't ignored by accident, it was systematically erased. The giants, once part of everyday life and work, became anomalies or myth when they didn't fit the official story. And yet the buildings remain. The oversized furniture, tools, and architectural designs still echo their presence, hinting at a society larger than what history admits. History hasn't lost these giants. History has chosen to forget them. As I traced the evidence further, a pattern became undeniable. The massive buildings, staircases, and doorways weren't isolated anomalies, they were everywhere. From St. Petersburg to Buenos Aires, from Delhi to small towns in America, structures built between the 1700s and 1900s share a peculiar feature: scaled for giants. In St. Petersburg, administrative hallways boast 12-foot doors. In Buenos Aires, municipal staircases require strides far beyond an average human. Delhi's colonial government offices feature desks and chairs that would leave a 6-foot man feeling like a child. These weren't ceremonial spaces or palaces meant to impress. They were working offices, administrative centers, and public buildings. And the proportions always matched the photographs of giants from the same period. Could this be a coincidence? Possibly, but the scale repeats across continents with unsettling precision. Even furniture in estate auctions and museum storage tells the same story. Chairs 7-8 feet tall, desks impossibly wide, tools designed for hands far larger than normal. No decorative excuse explains the scale consistently used in functional, everyday spaces. And here where Tartaria reappears. The maps from the 1700s show a vast region spanning northern Asia, erased mysteriously by the mid-1800s. But the buildings remain, monuments of a civilization seemingly forgotten, their design echoing a world built for giants. It raises a simple, terrifying question. If these giants weren't anomalies, then who really built the structures we attribute to smaller humans? Were these oversized administrators, overseers, or workers maintaining a society that official history has quietly removed from memory? Every photograph, skeleton report, and architectural oddity points in one direction. The giants weren't myth, they were reality, and their world was systematically erased, leaving only shadows in stone and steel for us to stumble upon. History didn't lose them. It was deliberately rewritten, leaving us with the question, what else have we been taught to ignore? The more I studied, the more it became clear. These giants weren't just curiosities, they were guardians, overseers, the administrators of a world we've forgotten. Buildings across continents, from Russia to South America, aren't just oversized for spectacle, they are functional monuments. Wide hallways, tall ceilings, enormous doors, they weren't designed for humans of average height. They were built for people 8 to 10 feet tall, operating machinery, supervising labor, managing civic duties. Photographs from the late 1800s show formal portraits of these giants, standing in government offices, construction sites, and official ceremonies. They're never depicted as entertainers, never labeled as freaks. They are part of society, holding authority, performing work. Estate auctions reveal chairs, desks, and tools scaled for their immense size. Wrenches over 5 feet long, furniture twice the size of normal humans, even beds that make our standard furniture look like children's toys. And it's not just isolated cases. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the architecture, furniture, and tools all point to the same conclusion. These individuals were essential to the functioning of a civilization. Tartaria suddenly makes sense. The maps that disappear in the 1800s, the photographs of giants, the massive functional buildings, all connected. The giants weren't erased by accident. Their society was systematically hidden from history, leaving behind only structures too large for normal humans, silent witnesses to a forgotten world. Every step through these buildings is a reminder. The world we think we know is built on the foundations of people larger than life, whose story was deliberately erased, but whose evidence cannot be ignored. By the 1920s, everything changes. The photographs of giants stop appearing. Newspaper reports of massive skeletons vanish. Maps no longer show Tartaria. Encyclopedias quietly omit references. It's not gradual, it's abrupt. The evidence that once dominated headlines, that once existed in plain sight, suddenly disappears. Skeletons sent to museums vanish. Photographs filed away and forgotten. Buildings remain, but the people they were built for are erased from memory. Why? What could explain this coordinated silence? Perhaps the giants weren't anomalies. They were part of a functioning society, a civilization with knowledge and infrastructure now lost. Removing them from history ensures that we cannot question what came before. Reports from newspapers across the United States in the late 1800s describe skeletons measuring 7 to 12 feet, often found in clusters with artifacts indicating advanced construction or metallurgical knowledge. And then, nothing. Suddenly, the discoveries cease. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. The giants appear, serve their purpose, and vanish in historical records exactly when Tartaria disappears from maps. Buildings too large, tools too heavy, furniture too massive, all remain. Silent testimony to what once existed. We are left with questions. Why did humans of extraordinary size exist, and why were they systematically erased from history? Who decided that these photographs, skeletons, and architectural evidence were no longer acceptable knowledge? And what else vanished alongside them, leaving us with only fragments and unanswered mysteries? Every abandoned building, every oversized tool, every forgotten photograph is a ghost of a civilization deliberately removed from memory. Tartaria is gone, the giants are gone, but their traces remain, waiting for someone willing to ask the questions everyone else has agreed to ignore. Even today, the evidence quietly persists, hidden in plain sight. Oversized doorways, massive staircases, chairs far too tall for ordinary humans, they all hint at a world built for giants. Not ceremonial monuments, not decorative excesses, functional structures designed for everyday use by people of extraordinary stature. Look closely at courthouses, administrative buildings, and estate homes from the 1700s and 1800s. The hallways stretch unnaturally high. Desks, benches, and chairs tower over what would be comfortable for a normal person. Why build like this if not for the people who used them? Even tools tell the story. Wrenches, hammers, mallets, massive, heavy, unwieldy for the average human hand, yet perfectly functional for hands larger and stronger than ours. The objects were not designed for show, but for work. They leave traces of a society where size mattered as much as skill. And the photographs reinforce this. Giants in formal attire, standing proudly in offices, guarding construction sites, supervising infrastructure. Not freaks for entertainment, not anomalies to study, but functional members of society, overseeing projects, maintaining order, building civilizations. But history erased them. Maps changed. Tartaria vanished. Newspapers stopped reporting. Museums hid the skeletons. The giants themselves disappeared from official memory. Yet their buildings, their tools, their photographic record endure. Every piece a clue, a whisper of the truth. When we walk through old government buildings or examine antique furniture and tools, we are literally touching the remnants of their world. The giants may be gone from our textbooks, but their presence lingers in architecture, in craftsmanship, in scale. The question remains, who were they and what else did we inherit from a civilization so large, so organized, so easily erased? The answers lie in careful observation, open minds, and the courage to question history itself. Every shadowy corridor, Every oversized artifact, every forgotten photograph is a thread connecting us to a reality deliberately hidden. And if we follow those threads, we may uncover the giant's legacy, and with it, the lost world of Tartaria. The story doesn't end with buildings and tools. Across continents, across centuries, the giants simply vanish. Photographs stop appearing in the 1890s. Skeletons cease to make headlines after 1920. Maps no longer show Tartaria. Encyclopedias quietly omit any reference. It's as if someone decided that asking questions about these extraordinary humans was forbidden. Newspapers that once reported giant skeletons and unusual discoveries suddenly go silent. Museums claim no records exist. Scholars dismiss the photographs as curiosities. Libraries archive the materials under miscellaneous or unverified. The erasure is systematic, subtle, almost invisible, but everywhere you look, it repeats. And yet evidence persists if you know where to see it. In Russia, massive stone halls remain with doorways sized for 9 or 10-foot individuals. In Central Asia, ruins suggest laborers and overseers of enormous scale. In Europe and the Americas, oversized tools and furniture appear repeatedly in estate sales and museum storage, yet their purpose is ignored. These aren't isolated anomalies, they are a pattern repeated across the globe. Giants were not curiosities, they were the guardians, administrators, and overseers of infrastructure, the functional elite of a civilization that the world forgot. And when that civilization disappeared from records, their people were erased with it. Maps were redrawn, official histories were rewritten, scholars were taught to ignore what they couldn't explain. Evidence that challenged the accepted narrative of humanity was quietly filed away or destroyed. Photographs, skeletons, and architecture were silenced, leaving only fragments, waiting for those brave enough to connect the dots. Ask yourself, how could such a consistent pattern of evidence appear independently across continents and then vanish simultaneously? The disappearances aren't random, they are deliberate. The giants were real, they were recorded, they were active members of society, and yet history erased them as if they never existed. But even in erasure, traces remain. The buildings, the tools, the photographs, the stories whispered in old records, they endure. Each one a reminder that the past is more complex, more astonishing than we are allowed to know. The giants weren't myths, they weren't freaks. They were a functional, powerful class of humans, and their sudden disappearance is one of history's greatest unanswered questions. While photographs and skeletons provide shocking evidence, the giants left behind something even more tangible: the tools and furniture they used. These weren't ceremonial artifacts or oversized curiosities. They were built for daily function, designed for humans far taller and stronger than the average person. In European estate auctions, massive wrenches appear, some 5 or 6 feet long, weighing hundreds of pounds, worn smooth in places where a human hand would grip. Desks, chairs, and beds found in old Victorian mansions rise 7 or 8 feet high, with armrests and backrests that make an average adult feel dwarfed. These objects were practical, made to be used, not to impress. Museums label them as industrial tools, decorative furniture, or anomalies, but they repeatedly appear across time and geography. Offices, courthouses, and administrative buildings from the 1700s and 1800s feature staircases, doorways, and desks scaled to giants. Residential homes, in contrast, remain human-sized. This was not random. It was a functional design choice, dictated by the people who inhabited these spaces. Imagine a 9-foot human standing at a massive oak desk, overseeing construction projects or administrative operations. The architecture and tools were customized to their proportions, allowing them to perform tasks impossible for average-sized humans. They weren't oversized for grandeur, they were oversized for work. Even mundane items, like kitchen utensils, farming implements, or measuring devices, appear in sizes far beyond normal human use. They suggest a society that relied on physically extraordinary humans for labor, governance, and infrastructure. Every artifact reinforces the idea: these giants were integrated into society, not treated as oddities. And then, like everything else, the trail goes cold. Tools vanish, furniture is repurposed or hidden, museums mislabel collections, and references in newspapers and official records stop. The giants and their equipment weren't just erased, they were systematically removed from the story of history. Yet every oversized chair, every massive wrench, every grand doorway still standing is a silent testament to their existence. The world they lived in was built for them, and the remnants are waiting for those who dare to question what we think we know about the past. The giants weren't confined to one country, one continent, or one culture. Evidence appears across the globe, from Europe to Asia, North America to South America. Museums, estate sales, and archival photographs repeatedly show individuals of extraordinary height, often integrated into society as guards, overseers, or administrators. In St. Petersburg, government offices from the 1700s feature 12-foot doorways and desks carved for hands far larger than ours. In Buenos Aires, staircases demand enormous strides. In Delhi, colonial-era administrative buildings contain chairs and tables sized for people who could tower over a standard adult. These weren't ceremonial spaces. They were functional environments designed for work. And then there's Tartaria, a civilization that once stretched across northern Asia, appearing on maps in the 1700s and early 1800s, now vanished from history books. Not conquered, not renamed, it was erased. But the buildings remain, massive halls, oversized doors, and structures built with precise engineering, all scaled for giant occupants. What if Tartaria wasn't myth? What if these giants weren't anomalies, but the very administrative backbone of a forgotten civilization? The photographs, the architecture, the oversized tools, they all point to a hidden pattern. Giants were everywhere at the peak of Tartaria's existence, then disappear as Tartaria itself disappears from maps and records. The global distribution isn't random. Europe, Asia, the Americas, they all share a period, primarily mid-1700s to late 1800s, where giants appear in formal photographs, newspapers report giant skeletons, and buildings are oversized to accommodate them. After that, references vanish almost entirely. The timing is too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Could it be that Tartaria's guardians, these towering humans, were the engineers, overseers, and protectors of a society whose technology and knowledge we've inherited but barely understand? Every photograph, every building, every tool whispers the same question. Who were these giants, and why did history pretend they never existed? Even today, these structures and artifacts remain, silent witnesses to a world systematically hidden from us. Tartaria's giants may have vanished from the records, but their legacy lingers in the shadows, waiting for those willing to see the truth. The photographs are the first clue, not illustrations, not folklore, but actual photographs from the 1800s showing men and women 8, 9, sometimes 10 feet tall standing beside average humans. The lighting, the shadows, the grain, all authentic. These weren't circus performers or hoaxes. They were ordinary people in extraordinary scale. Families, officials, guards living their lives. Then there are the skeletons. Newspapers across the United States report giant human remains, often in organized burials, 7 to 12 feet long, dating from the mid-1800s to early 1900s. The New York Times, 1885, reports a 7-foot skeleton in Michigan. The San Diego Union, 1895, mentions enormous bones unearthed during railroad excavation. The Middletown Signal, 1899, finds organized giant burials in Ohio. This wasn't sensationalism. This was mainstream news, yet it disappears abruptly after 1920. Skeletons already discovered vanish, sent to institutions, then lost or misplaced. Museums and universities never display them, archives quietly file them away, and research papers ignore them. Photographs stop appearing, newspaper reports vanish, maps stop showing Tartaria, buildings remain oversized, but the people they were built for are erased from history. The pattern is chilling in its precision. It's not random, it's systematic erasure. Even more unsettling, the skeletal evidence aligns perfectly with architectural records. Buildings with giant-scaled doors, staircases, and furniture were used in the same decades as these giants lived. Tools, from massive wrenches to industrial equipment, appear in the same historical window, all designed for people of extraordinary size and strength. Institutions didn't need to hide anything actively. They simply ignored it, dismissed it as anomaly, filed it under miscellaneous, and allowed collective memory to erase the giants naturally. This passive suppression left the evidence intact but inaccessible to public understanding, a conspiracy of omission. And yet the proof persists. Photographs, architecture, tools, and skeletal remains are scattered across continents. They are silent witnesses, waiting for those brave enough to ask the questions everyone else avoids. Who are these giants? What was Tartaria? And why did history pretend it never existed? Walking through estate sales and forgotten museum storage rooms, I kept stumbling upon objects too large to belong to ordinary humans. Chairs, desks, tables, even beds, everything scaled for someone twice the size of an average person. Ordinary furniture designed for daily use, yet impossible for us to comfortably use today. The chairs are the first clue. Seat heights of 30 to 36 inches, backs stretching 7 to 8 feet tall, armrests positioned so a normal human's arms would dangle uselessly. Auction catalogues dismiss them as decorative or Victorian curiosities, but the wear marks tell a different story, evidence of repeated use by massive hands. Then the tools. Massive wrenches, hammers, and construction implements, 4 to 6 feet long, designed for hands stronger than 3 average men combined. Industrial tools, functional, showing wear patterns, used, not ceremonial. Museums label them industrial equipment, but the question remains, for what industrial process would such tools be necessary? Even personal objects align with this scale. Clothing, boots, belts, everything proportionally oversized. They were not freaks or anomalies, they were workers, guardians, administrators. The artifacts fit perfectly with the photographs and architectural evidence we've uncovered. And it's everywhere. In Europe, North America, Russia, India, the tools, furniture, and daily use items consistently appear from 1850 to 1900, coinciding with Tartaria's documented presence. Buildings, objects, and skeletal evidence all point to the same reality. A class of humans significantly taller and stronger than the average population. Yet history books ignore them. Scholars debate architecture, not the humans it was built for. Museums display the buildings, the chairs, the tools, but rarely mention the people. It's a systematic narrative omission, leaving the giants in shadow, their lives hinted at only through artifacts. When you put it together, the photographs, skeletal evidence, furniture, tools, and architecture, one truth becomes clear: these weren't myths. These weren't anomalies. They were real people living in a world scaled to their presence. And yet, almost overnight, history erased them. The giants of Tartaria weren't just large humans. They were a functional, organized society, a guardian class whose lives, work, and tools were deliberately written out of history. Every object, every artifact whispers the same question. Who were they? And why did the world pretend they never existed? By the 1920s, the trail of giants abruptly disappears. Photographs stop appearing. Newspaper reports of giant skeletons vanish. Auction catalogues quietly replace oversized furniture with standard proportions. The maps are redrawn. Encyclopedias edited. Historians move on. It's not that the giants vanished biologically. They didn't just stop existing. They were erased from memory. Every trace of their existence systematically removed. The buildings remain, but the occupants, written out. The tools remain, but the hands that wielded them, forgotten. The chairs, desks, beds, and staircases, once normal in proportion for their users, now appear absurd, oversized, inexplicable. Consider the newspapers. Mainstream, reputable sources reporting skeletons 7 to 12 feet long, burial sites carefully organized, artifacts accompanying the remains indicating advanced knowledge of metallurgy and construction. Then, silence. Suddenly, it's as if the giants never existed, and anyone who asks questions is met with polite dismissal or ignored entirely. The disappearance is eerily precise. 1850-1900, photographic and physical evidence clusters. Post 1920, the records stop. Why then? Because that is when the last references to Tartaria, the civilization that housed them, are erased. Maps no longer mention it. atlases and encyclopedias scrubbed. What remains are buildings scaled for impossible human proportions, scattered across continents, mute witnesses to a forgotten era. And yet the artifacts speak. They tell a story of functional giants, not myths. Guardians, overseers, administrators, humans whose size was integral to society's operations, who ensured construction, maintained infrastructure, and preserved order. They were not anomalies. They were designed to serve specific societal functions, a class systematically removed from history. The silence is the final piece of evidence. Academic circles dismiss these questions, museums lock away the evidence, government archives misfile photographs. The pattern repeats worldwide, not active censorship, but passive erasure, a coordinated forgetting. The giants weren't just erased, they were made invisible. And when you walk through the same halls today, measure the oversized doors, the grand staircases, the tall windows, the massive furniture, you realize the truth. History didn't just ignore them. History was rewritten to make them impossible. The question that lingers is simple, yet haunting. If such a civilization existed, what else was lost along with it? What knowledge, what technologies, what truths about humanity have been quietly buried beneath the narrative of progress? The giants remain, silent in stone and steel, in furniture and tools, in photographs that refuse to fade. And if you look closely, their story whispers to those willing to notice the truth that we have been taught to forget. Even as the giants disappear from records, the buildings they once inhabited remain. Massive doors, towering ceilings, staircases with impossibly tall risers, all silent witnesses to their former occupants. But these structures were not built for show. They were functional spaces, designed with precision to suit people of extraordinary size. Look closely at administrative buildings from the 1700s and 1800s. Ordinary humans cannot navigate them comfortably. Chairs rise too high, desks extend too far, door handles hang above the reach of an average man. Everything scales perfectly to a giant's proportions. And these weren't isolated instances. Across Europe, North America, Russia, India, the same patterns emerge. Municipal halls, courthouses, palaces, government offices, all disproportionately large. The giants weren't anomalies or ceremonial figures. They were operators, overseers, guardians of infrastructure, ensuring society functioned smoothly. Consider the photographs again, not circus sideshows, not freaks of nature. They show men, and sometimes women, standing tall in formal portraits, surrounded by ordinary humans, often in uniform, often with a sense of authority. These were functional members of society, their size an asset, their presence necessary. Now connect the architecture. Buildings designed for giants suggest that society accommodated them, that they were integrated into everyday life. Large chairs, desks, tools, staircases, all meant for their use, not ours. Imagine a construction site overseen by a 9-foot-tall supervisor, stones lifted with ease, machinery operated with unmatched strength. The infrastructure we admire today may have been shaped by their hands, not ours. And then there's Tartaria. Maps of the 1700s and 1800s show a vast, organized civilization spanning northern Asia. A society capable of monumental architecture, with roads, walls, and cities built on a scale that aligns with the giant's size. When Tartaria vanishes from official records, the giants vanish with it, not biologically, but from the narrative of history. What if the reason the giants disappear from records isn't natural or coincidental? What if their erasure was deliberate? By removing their existence, history could rewrite itself, and the narrative of human civilization would remain linear, ordinary, and comprehensible. The buildings, the tools, the furniture, they remain, a ghostly imprint of a reality we are not allowed to fully remember. And so the giants continue to speak through stone and steel, wood and metal, photographs and measurements. They were the society's scaffolding, its guardians, its hidden administrators. Erase them, and the history they built can be claimed by someone else, repurposed, retold, but never fully understood. Question persists. What was lost when the giants disappeared from record? What knowledge, what technologies, what truths about human society were buried along with them? Every oversized chair, every grand doorway, every photograph, These are the whispers of a civilization that refuses to be completely forgotten. The more I studied, the more the puzzle pieces aligned. These giants weren't just random anomalies, they were functional cogs in a sophisticated civilization. And that civilization, Tartaria. Tartaria's maps show a network of cities, roads, fortifications, and monumental buildings. Everything was meticulously planned, from massive gates to complex water channels. But look closer, these structures are too large, too precise to have been built for ordinary humans. The giants fit the scale perfectly. Tools too tell a story. Oversized wrenches, hammers, even farming implements, each designed for hands far larger than ours. These weren't ceremonial artifacts, they were daily use instruments for a population of extraordinary stature. And they were everywhere, from North America to Europe, Asia to South America. Photographs support the claim. Formal portraits of giants often place them alongside construction projects or administrative buildings, not in domestic settings. They stand in positions of authority, overseeing operations, directing labor, ensuring precision in structures that still baffle modern engineers. And yet history pretends they never existed. Newspaper reports of giant skeletons stop abruptly in the early 20th century. Museums claim the remains lost or misplaced. Maps of Tartaria vanish. Encyclopedias rewrite themselves. A civilization and its giant guardians are erased simultaneously, leaving only stone, wood, and metal as clues to the truth. Why would this happen? Consider the implications. A society with giants capable of overseeing monumental construction would outmatch contemporary civilizations in labor and organization. Their infrastructure, roads, canals, bridges, public works, would give them a strategic and technological advantage. Erase the giants, erase Tartaria, and suddenly, modern nations appear as the sole inheritors of progress. Every building, every photograph, every oversized artifact is a silent witness to what was deliberately hidden. If you measure doors and staircases from the 1700s or 1800s, the dimensions fit giants, not humans. If you study estate auctions or forgotten museums, the furniture fits giants, not humans. The evidence is everywhere if you know how to read it. And here's the chilling part. The giants weren't rulers. They were guardians, overseers, administrators, the hands that kept Tartaria functioning. By erasing them from memory, those who wanted control not only erased people, they erased knowledge, capability, and understanding. The infrastructure remains, but the custodians of it are gone. Now the world walks through their legacy blind to the scale and genius required to create it. The buildings, the tools, the photographs, they survive as whispers of a civilization deliberately scrubbed from history. Giants weren't mistakes. They were civilization's backbone. And Tartaria's disappearance, a systematic erasure of both people and knowledge, leaving the present to inherit only fragments, never the full truth. By the early 1900s, the giants vanish from the record. Photographs stop appearing, skeletons cease to be reported, Tartaria disappears from maps. It's as if they simply faded from existence, leaving behind only whispers and oversized artifacts. But the clues remain, subtle and scattered, like breadcrumbs for those willing to notice. Stone structures with massive doorways still stand, their proportions too large for ordinary humans. Furniture and tools, long forgotten in museums and estate sales, hint at hands far bigger than ours. Every piece tells the same story. Someone deliberately erased the people, but the evidence of their lives persists. Consider the patterns. The giants are always associated with infrastructure, governance, and construction. They are rarely shown in domestic scenes, rarely mentioned in casual accounts. Why? Because their existence challenged the accepted narrative of history. To acknowledge them fully would be to admit that civilizations existed with capabilities beyond what we were taught, that Tartaria's disappearance was not natural but intentional. Even the landscapes hold secrets. Old maps show roads and canals that make no sense for normal-sized humans. Bridges span distances that ordinary workers could not have built alone. Cities planned with geometric precision hint at a population capable of supervising and executing complex projects at a scale now unimaginable. And yet the official story remains: anomalies, freaks, decorative excess. But look closer, Every anomaly fits a pattern. Every freak has context. Every piece of furniture, tool, or building designed for giants points to a lost civilization hidden in plain sight. The most unsettling clue: some photographs from the 1800s show giants interacting with people of normal height, guiding them, instructing them, overseeing their work. They weren't isolated. They were integrated into society. They were functional, essential, the unseen pillars of a forgotten civilization. Now ask yourself, if you had the power to erase an entire class of people from history, people whose existence would expose truths inconvenient to those in power, wouldn't you do it? Remove the giants, erase the maps, alter the records, dismiss the photographs. And that is exactly what happened. The legacy of the giants isn't gone, it's hidden in plain sight. Every oversized door, every massive staircase, every tool built for enormous hands is a silent testimony. The question isn't whether they existed, the question is, how much of history was rewritten to hide them, and what else vanished along with them. And as we walk through cities and buildings built centuries ago, we are literally walking among their work, touching objects scaled for hands we cannot imagine, yet ignoring the story they silently tell. Tartaria may be erased, but its guardians left a mark that no historian, map, or official record can fully erase. Before we dive in, if you're enjoying this journey through history's hidden truths, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next story. Comment below, what do you think really happened to the giants of Tartaria? I'd love to read your theories. By the end of the 19th century, the giants disappear from every photograph, every record, and every map. Tartaria is gone, rewritten out of history, yet the evidence stubbornly remains: oversized furniture, massive tools, impossibly tall doorways, and architectural marvels scattered across continents. They are silent witnesses to a forgotten world. Think about it. Why do courthouses, government buildings, and colonial estates feature proportions too large for ordinary humans? Why were photographs meticulously taken of giants standing formally with authority, and why did these images suddenly stop appearing? The answers point to a systematic erasure, a deliberate rewriting of history. The giants weren't freaks. They weren't anomalies. They were functional members of a civilization with skills, strength, and roles that modern society struggles to comprehend. Guardians, administrators, overseers, they were the backbone of Tartaria, and their disappearance reshaped the narrative we now call history. And yet their legacy is everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Doorways taller than any normal person could fit. Staircases requiring enormous strides. Tools too heavy and large to be used by regular hands. Every piece of evidence is a silent scream from the past, reminding us that what we've been told isn't the full story. And the more you look, the more it becomes clear: history is not always what it seems. So here's the question for you: if giants walked the earth and helped build civilizations, what else have we been taught to ignore? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because the discussion doesn't end here. The story is bigger than any one video, and your perspective might uncover pieces even historians have missed. Remember, like, subscribe, and share this video if you want to continue uncovering history's hidden giants with us. Tartaria may have vanished from maps, but the guardians of the past left a trail for those willing to ask the right questions.